Chapter 4. Peter's Lodgings. Let me get this right, Coldwell said slowly. Drews will be killed if he is killed because he does not like children? Leslie Maughan nodded. I know you hate mysteries. Everybody in Scotland Yard does, she said, and one day I will tell you just what I mean. Do you remember last August you gave me a month's vacation? Chief Inspector Coldwell remembered that very well. I went to Cumberland just to loaf around, she said. I was most anxious to pretend that there wasn't such a place in the world as Scotland Yard. But I've got that prowling, inquisitive spirit that would have made me the first woman inspector of the CID if the commissioners were not such stuffy, old-fashioned gentlemen. One day I was loafing through a little village when I found something which brought me eventually to this conclusion, that Drews doesn't like children. And one day, when he discovers the fact, Peter Dawlish will kill him for it. More mysterious than ever, exclaimed Coldwell. You're probably chasing a boojum. It is the fate of all enthusiastic young officers. Not that you're an officer. Leslie Maughan had started her police career as a very junior stenographer at Scotland Yard. Her father had been that famous assistant commissioner Maughan whose exploits have formed the basis for so many stories of police work, and he had left his daughter with an income which put her above the necessity of working for her living. But police investigation was in her blood, and she had graduated through successive stages until the authorities, reluctant to admit that any woman had an executive position at police headquarters, admitted her to the designation of assistant to the chief of the Big Four. She's brilliant. There's no other word for her, he had told the chief commissioner. And although I don't think it's much of a woman's job, there never was a woman who was better fitted to hold down a high position at the yard. What are her chief qualifications? Asked the commissioner slightly. Amused. She thinks quick and she's lucky, was the comprehensive reply. This question of luck exercised the mind of Leslie as she walked home to her flat in the Charing Cross Road. The very fact that that apartment was hers was strong support for the theory of luck. She had taken a long lease of a floor above a moving picture house at a time when flats were going begging. She might have drawn double the rent from a subtenant, but the place was central, comparatively cheap, and she withstood all temptations to change her abode at a profit. A side door led to the apartments, and she had hardly closed the door behind her when a voice hailed her from the top of the stairs. That you, Miss Maughan? That's me, said Leslie. She hung her coat in the narrow hall and went upstairs to the girl who was waiting on the landing. Lucretia Brown, her one servant, was a very tall, broad-shouldered girl with a round and not unpleasant face. She stood now with her hands on her hips, surveying her mistress. I thought you were, she began. You thought I'd been murdered and thrown into the river, said Leslie good-humoredly. As you always think if I am not back on the tick. I don't trust London, said Lucretia. It was her real name, chosen by a misguided farm laborer, who, having heard a lecture on the Borgias, delivered at the parish hall, came away with a vague idea that the historical character who bore that name was a worthy creature. I never did trust London, and I never will. Have you had dinner, miss? Yes, I've had my dinner, said Leslie, and looked at the clock. I am expecting a man to call here at 10:30, so, when you open the door to him, please don't tell him that I'm out and not expected back for 3 weeks. Lucretia made a little face. 10:30's a bit late for a gentleman visitor, miss. A friend of yours? Leslie could never train her out of a personal interest in her affairs. In a way, Lucretia was privileged. Her first memory was of the broad-faced Lucretia pushing a perambulator in which Leslie took the air. Is it anybody we know, miss? Mr. Coldwell? Leslie shook her head. No, she said. He is a man who has just come out of prison. Lucretia closed her eyes and swayed. Good heavens, she said in a hushed voice. I never thought I'd live to see the day when you'd be having a convict up to see you at 10:30 at night. What about asking a policeman to stand by the door, miss? You're much too partial to policemen, said Leslie severely, and the big maid grew incoherent in her indignant protests. 10:30 was striking from St. Martin's in the Fields when the doorbell rang, and Lucretia came into her, eyes big with excitement. That's him, she said melodramatically. Well, let him in. Whatever happens, began Lucretia, I'm not responsible. Leslie pointed to the door. He came so lightly up the stairs that she did not hear his steps. The door opened and Lucretia backed in. The gentleman, she said loudly, and cast an apprehensive glance at the stranger as she sidled out of the room and closed the door. Peter Dawlish stood where Lucretia had left him, his soft hat in his hand, glancing from the girl to the cozy room, a smile on his thin face. She saw now how shabbily dressed he was. His shirt was collarless, his boots gray with mud, the old, ill-fitting suit he wore stained and patched. I warned you I was a scarecrow, he said, as though he read her thoughts. They gave me a beautiful prison-made suit at Dartmoor, but it didn't seem the right kind of equipment with which to face a censorious world, so I swapped it for this. She pushed a chair up to the fire. Sit down, won't you, Mr. Dawlish? Mr. Dawlish, he repeated. That sounds terribly respectable. You may smoke if you wish, she said, as he seated himself slowly, and again he smiled. I wish, but I have not the wherewithal. She hastily opened a drawer and took out a tin of cigarettes. Thank you, he said. He took the cigarette in his fingers and frowned. That is certainly queer, he said. What is certainly queer? She asked. These gaspers, I used to smoke them in the old days. Had imported from Cairo. You can't buy them here, at least you couldn't when I retired. Hego. Am I being very sorry for myself again? That stung. I loathe these self-pitiers, and it was a revelation to discover that I had gone over to the majority. He lit the cigarette and drew luxuriously. This is rather wonderful, he said. Have you had any food? She asked. He nodded. I dined like a sybarite at a small shop in the Blackfriars Road. The dinner cost 6 pence. It was rather an extravagance, but I felt I needed bracing for this ordeal. You have no lodging? He shook his head. No, I have no lodging. He was twiddling his long, thin fingers. She noted with satisfaction that his hands were scrupulously clean, and again he seemed to divine her thoughts, for he looked down at them. I don't exactly know what information I can give you, if it is information you require, and if you had been a male of the species policeman, I should have declined your invitation rather loftily. But a woman policeman is unique. I've seen them, of course, rather fat little bodies with squat little helmets. I suppose they're useful. He noticed that she herself was not smoking and commented upon it. No, I very rarely smoke, she said. And then, in a changed tone, do you mind if I speak very plainly? The plainer the better, he said, and he leaned back in his chair and sent a cloud of smoke to the ceiling. I dare say you'll be forced to walk London tonight? It has become a habit, said Peter Dawlish. And really, it would be rather amusing if one weren't so horribly tired. They gave me a little money when I left prison, not much. One gets quite a lot of sleep in the daytime, especially the sunny days, in odd corners of the parks. And on rainy nights, I know a gardener's tool house, which is not perhaps to be compared with a bridal suite at an expensive hotel, but is cozy. I slept there last night with an ex-colonel of infantry and a lawyer who lived in the same ward at Dartmoor. She eyed him steadily. Tonight you will sleep decently, she said, in her quiet, even tone. And tomorrow you will buy a new suit of clothes and interview your father. He raised his eyebrows, amusement in his eyes. I didn't realize that you had scraped down to the family skeleton, he said. And why am I to do this, Miss Maughan? The suit of clothes would be a waste of money. My parent would not be impressed by my appearance of affluence. Rather, he would imagine that I had found another good-natured gentleman who trusted me with his checkbook. Furthermore, all this would cost money, and I think you should know, before we go any further, that I am not taking any money from you on any pretext. She had the extraordinary knack of making him feel foolish. He always remembered afterward that in the first 2 meetings with this strange girl he had gone hot and cold either at her words or the inflection of her voice. That kind of pride which refuses to take money from a woman is very admirable. There was a note of cold sarcasm in her voice which made him writhe. It is the attitude of mind behind man's subconscious sense of superiority to the female of the species. It is not particularly flattering to a woman, but it must be immensely gratifying to a man. May I ask you another question, Mr. Peter Dawlish? Do you intend sinking down into the dregs? Is your vista of life lined on either side by common lodging houses, with a pauper's graveyard at the end of it? I don't exactly see what you're driving at. She had made him angry, and was secretly amused. I shall do my best, naturally, to find work. I had an idea of going abroad. Exactly. She nodded. To one of the colonies. It is the most popular of all delusions that people without grit or ambition can magically acquire these qualities the moment they go ashore at Quebec or Sydney, or wherever their high spirits lead them. He was laughing now in spite of himself. You've certainly got a knack of riling a man. Haven't I? She put in. I'll tell you what I was driving at, Mr. Dawlish. For you to refuse a loan of money now suggests that you're perfectly satisfied in your mind that you will never earn enough to repay the loan. The only way you can justify a refusal of money is to believe that you can never pay it back, that you're going to belong to the bread lines and the park benches and the public charities. She saw that her shaft had got home, and went on quickly. Of course you will do nothing of the sort. You've come out of prison with a grievance against the world, and you're hardly to be blamed for that. I should imagine you are one of the few innocent men who ever went to Dartmoor. He looked at her shrewdly. You believe I was innocent? She nodded. I'm pretty sure, she said, and then, do you carry a gun? He laughed aloud. The price of a Browning pistol would keep me in luxury for 2 months, he said. No, I carry nothing more dangerous than a toothbrush. The drawer from which she had taken the cigarettes was still open. She put in her hand and took out a small black cash box and jerked back the lid. We will do this thing in a businesslike way, she said. You will find a paper and pencil on the desk. Sign an IOU for £20. If you believe in your heart of hearts that you'll be unable to pay me back, that a man of 29 or 28, or whatever age you are, will never earn a sufficient margin above his cost of living to send back that money in a year or 2 years, then you need not take a cent. And this little bit of charity, as you call it. I've called it nothing of the sort. In your mind you have, she said calmly. It is very rude to contradict a lady. Now, Mr. Dawlish, I challenge you. If you think you are permanently down and out, the incident is finished, and I think you're finished too. She looked at him through her half-closed eyes, nodding slowly. You mean I'm not worth salving? He asked and got up. I'll accept your challenge. He took the pencil, scribbled a few words on the writing pad, and, tearing it off, handed it to the girl. Produce your £20. He was amused in a sour way, but his anger was mostly directed inward to himself, that he should be angry at all. If anybody had told him, when he had walked into that room, that he would accept a loan of money from the girl who had not been absent from his thoughts since he had met her, he would have laughed at such a suggestion. Yet here he was, counting solemnly the notes as they were handed to him, and pocketing them without one single qualm of conscience. I think I'm beginning to know myself, he said. I started a weakling, and prison hasn't improved me. No, I do not mean that it is a weakness to accept this money, but it would have been a weakness to refuse. I'm awfully obliged to you. She held out her hand. Where will you be staying? She asked. I don't know, but I will keep in touch with you. Please don't bother about me anymore. If I can't get a job of some kind, I'm really not worth helping. Why are you doing this? It isn't part of the usual police procedure. She shook her head. The police help where they can. You ought to know that, she said quietly. But I admit that this is a purely personal action on my part. You are part of a big experiment. It isn't my womanly heart, but my scientific brain that is dictating just now. And then, going off at a tangent, I wish you would shave yourself, Mr. Dawlish. You look too much like a musical genius to be thoroughly wholesome. He was still chuckling to himself when Lucretia closed the outer door upon him with unnecessary violence. He knew a small temperance hotel where he could sleep that night, a place in Lambeth, near Waterloo Station. Temperance Hotel, was rather a grand name for an establishment which was only a little superior to a common lodging house, but he guessed it was too late to get a bed at any of the Roten houses. He walked briskly down Charing Cross Road and into the Strand, crowded with cars and taxis, for the theatres were closing and the northern sidewalk was almost impassable. And then he thought he saw his mother preceding another lady into a car, and stopped. Yes, it was Margaret Dawlish, and the lady with the dirty gray hair was Anita. He could afford to grin now, and the discovery was very pleasurable. He could well imagine that if he had seen that party earlier in the evening, the sight would have evoked a sneer and just that twinge of self-pity against which he was trying hard to guard himself. He turned back, lest in passing they recognize him, and went down Villiers Street, mounting the stairs to Hungerford Bridge. It was not the 20 notes in his pocket, a compact, cozy little roll, that made his heart and his step lighter. He had caught something of the girl's spirit, had been imbued with a little of her courage and sanity. Leslie Maughan puzzled him. She was more than pretty. There was in her face a spirituality which he had not detected in the face of any woman of his acquaintance or knowledge. He realized with a start that he had always disliked clever women. He liked them soft and feminine, and if the truth be told, a little silly. But he liked this capable and pretty young woman. Leslie Maughan had just enough of the official quality to keep him at a distance, and yet she was genuinely friendly as a sensible elder sister might be, though in truth she must be years younger than he. Sometimes he felt a very old man. Leslie Maughan had made him feel like a child. He was over the middle of the river now, and there was revealed to him the pageantry of the embankment, with its lights reflected in the dark waters of the Thames. He felt himself responding to the glow and color of it. And then, for no reason at all, he had an uncomfortable feeling that he could not trace, but instinctively he looked back. There were several people crossing with him, but immediately behind him, not half a dozen yards away, were 3 little men who moved shoulder to shoulder. They had the curious high-stepping walk which he had seen in Orientals, a sort of modified prance. They were not speaking to one another, as friends might who were walking home together, and, curiously enough, it was their silence which made him uneasy. 5 years in a penal establishment had not been a good nerve cure for a man of Peter Dawlish's temperament. He ran down the steps and found himself in a dim and gloomy street. From here was a short cut to the York Road, near where his Temperance Hotel was situated. His way led him through a deserted street of tiny houses that was not quite a slum, but was barely respectable. As he turned into the thoroughfare, he glanced back and saw that the 3 little men were following. They moved noiselessly, as though they were wearing rubber shoes. Peter crossed the road, and they followed a little nearer to him. He was wondering whether it would not be better to turn and face them till they had passed. He had decided upon this action when something fell over his head. He raised his hand quickly to catch at the thin rope, but it was too late. The slip knot tightened about his throat. 2 muscular little figures leaped at him, and in another second he was lying on the ground, fighting for life, strangled, his head bursting, his hands clawing at the rope. And then consciousness left him. After an eternity, he felt somebody lifting him up and propping him against a wall. A brilliant light shone on his face. Peter put his hand to his throat. The rope had gone, but he could still feel the deep depression it had made upon his skin. "What was the game?" said a gruff voice. He blinked up, could distinguish a helmeted head, a policeman. "How do you feel? Would you like me to get an ambulance? I can put you into the hospital in a minute." Shaking in every limb, Peter struggled to his feet. "I'm all right," he said unsteadily. "Who were they?" The policeman shook his head. "I don't know. They passed me at the end of the street, and I thought they looked queer. Little fellows with flat noses, more like monkeys than men. And then I saw them go for you, and came after them. I think I just about saved your life, young fellow." "I think you did," said Peter ruefully, as he felt at his scarred throat. "Run. I never saw anybody run as fast as they did," said the constable. "Did you ever row with them?" "No, I never saw them before in my life," said Peter. "Humph." The officer was looking at him dubiously. "Wonder who they were?" "They talked in some lingo I didn't understand." I only caught one word, or maybe it's two, orange pander or bander. Orang blenga? Asked Peter quickly and whistled.
Knowing.
Peter shook his head. No, I don't know them. I guess their nationality. Javanese. The officer was loath to leave him. Where are you going now? I'm trying to find a lodging. He was still far from recovered, for when he took a step the street and the officer went round in a mad whirl, and but for the policeman's arm, he would have fallen. You'll get yourself pinched for being drunk, said the policeman humorously. Lodgings? Now where did I see a lodging? He switched on his light, walked slowly down the street, flashing the lamp upon the windows. Presently, he stopped. Here you are, he said. Peter made a slow and cautious way to where the policeman was standing. The lantern was focused upon a little card in the window, lodgings for a respectable young man. Will this do for you? Peter nodded, and the constable rapped gently on the door. He had to wait some time, but presently there was a heavy foot in the passage, and a woman's voice asked hoarsely, It's all right, missus, said the custodian of the law. I'm a policeman. There's a gentleman here who wants lodging. The door was unlocked and opened a few inches. I've got a room, yes, but it's a bit late, ain't it? The constable uttered an exclamation of surprise. Why, bless me, it's Mrs. Inglethorne. Yes, it's Mrs. Inglethorne, repeated the woman bitterly. And well you ought to know, considering the trouble you police have brought on me. My old man being as innocent as a babe unborn, and our lodger as nice a young man as ever drew the breath of life. She peered at Peter in the reflection from the policeman's light. He saw a bloated red face, a loose mouth, and eyes of singular smallness.
She was
short and stout and wore a red flannel dressing gown, though apparently she had not disrobed for the night. I can't take you unless you've got money, she said. I've been done before. Peter skinned a pound from the roll and showed it to her. All right, come in, she said ungraciously. Stopping only to thank the policeman for his help, Peter followed her into the narrow, evil-smelling passage, and the door closed behind him. Fate had played its supreme joke on Peter Dawlish when it had led him to the unsavory home of Mrs. Inglethorne. She struck a match, lit a smelly little oil lamp, and preceded him up a steep, short flight of stairs to the floor above. Here's the room, she said, and he followed her into the front and the best bedroom in the house. To his surprise, it was fairly well furnished. The bed was a new one. The walls had been lately papered. The two cheap engravings which constituted the pictorial embellishment of the apartment were in good taste. This was my lodger's room. He furnished it himself, said Mrs. Inglethorne rapidly. As nice a man as ever drew the breath of life. She pronounced the last sentence so quickly that it almost seemed to be one word. Has he left you? She glanced at him suspiciously as though she thought that he was already informed as to the lodger's fate. He's got 5 years for busting a house up at Blackheath. My old man got 7, and an honester man there never was. A grim jest this, thought Peter Dawlish, that he, newly from that drab and drear establishment on Dartmoor, should be offered the vacant bedroom of one who had taken his place, was probably in the very cell in B ward he had occupied. Pay in advance, 8 shillings. I'll give you the change tomorrow. Mrs. Inglethorne held out her hand. In the light of the lamp, she was even more unprepossessing than Peter had thought. He gathered from certain evidence that prohibition would find no vigorous supporter in her. She took the money he gave her, and, setting down the lamp, opened a chest and extracted 2 new sheets. Evidently, thought Peter, as he watched the process of bed-making, the burglar-lodger was fastidious in the matter of comfort. The sheets were of linen. He discovered later that the pillows were of down, and that the bed itself was a luxurious article purchased at great cost in Tottenham Court Road. He liked everything of the best, said Mrs. Inglethorne, pausing in her labors to extol the absent tenant. She went out soon after, leaving behind her a faint odor of spirituous liquor. He undressed slowly by the light of the lamp, preparing for the first good night's sleep he had had in a week. The bed was soft, too soft. Although he was desperately tired, he tossed from side to side in a vain endeavor to sleep. It must have been 2 hours before he dozed, and then he woke. It was a shrill, thin cry that woke him, and he sat up in bed, listening. It came again, from somewhere downstairs. It was a cat, he thought. No human voice was capable of such an attenuation of sound. Again the cry. He got out of bed, walked to the door, opened it and bent his head, listening. And then the hair of his head rose. It was a child's sobs he heard, and then a voice. I want my daddy. I want my daddy. He heard Mrs. Inglethorne's growling voice, as if she had been wakened from sleep. Shut up, blast you. If I get up to you, I'll break your neck. And then the voices ceased, and Peter went back to bed. But it was not until the sound of closing doors in the street told him that the early workers were abroad that he fell into a troubled sleep, disturbed by dreams of a child who cried and moaned all the time. I want my daddy. I want my daddy. Chapter 5. A Dead Man. Leslie received a letter on the following afternoon when she came back from her office. 104, Severall Street, Lambeth. Dear Miss Mon, I have lodgings at the above address, and in spite of the neighborhood they are very comfortable, though my landlady is certainly the most unprepossessing female. There are 6 children in the house, ranging from a few months to a little girl of 8 years. So, whatever are her faults, Mrs. Inglethorne, who drinks gin and has the fiery face of a Betsy Prig, has served her country most prolifically. I am buying some new clothes and hope to report, in a few days, that I am riding upward on a tide of prosperity. What Mr. Coldwell called the Dawlish case, but which she thought about under quite another title, was completely occupying the girl's mind. It was her first big case in the sense that never before had the wheels of investigation moved of her own volition. There had been more spectacular events with which she had been associated. She had helped Coldwell in the Kent Tunnel murder. It was her quick mind which had first grasped the fact that the principal informant of the police knew too much about the tragedy for one who had not participated in the crime. She it was who, searching the contents of a prisoner's pocket, had found the stain of indelible ink upon a silver coin, and had built upon that slender clue the theory which led to the arrest of the Flack gang, and the capture of the plant with which they had been flooding Europe with forged 1,000-franc notes. She brought to police work the keenest of woman's wits and a queer instinct for ultimate causes that sometimes amazed and sometimes amused headquarters. And now she was building up a new fabric, but, as she realized, on the shakiest of foundations, a little book of verse found in a Cumberland cottage. She took it down from her shelf, a thin volume of Elizabeth Browning's poems. On the flyleaf was an inscription and 8 lines of writing in a neat hand. A stanza of free verse, and not especially good free verse. She read it for the 50th time. Do you recall One Dusky Night in June over by Harlow Copse, Heart of My Heart? Ecstasy lay on your lips, nectar of gods was your gift. All in the kiss of one girl, joy and despair. The writer was no poet. Even as a writer of vers libre, his effort left something to be desired. She put away the book, returned to her desk, and sat for half an hour, her chin in her hands, her eyes fixed vacantly on the opposite wall. For the moment Peter Dawlish was off her hands, and though he came back again and again to her thoughts, it was not in the role of a responsibility. She took from a drawer the tin of cigarettes she had offered him on the previous night and examined it absently. She had searched London for this brand of Egyptian cigarettes, and in the end had found them in the last place in the world she expected, Scotland Yard. The chief commissioner, an old Egyptian officer, imported them for his own use. She closed the lid, found an envelope, and addressing it to Peter Dawlish, ESQ 104, Severall Street, London, she enclosed the cigarettes. It was nearly dark when Lucretia brought in her tea. You're not going out again tonight, miss, are you? When Leslie replied in the affirmative. What about taking me with you, Miss Leslie? Leslie did not laugh. Somehow I can't see you in the setting of a nightclub, Lucretia, she said. I could stay outside, insisted Lucretia stoutly. Anyway, I'd never dream of going into a nightclub after what the papers say about it. I saw a party getting out of a car the other night. Ladies. Why, miss, I could have carried all their dresses in a little bag. Disgraceful, I call it. Leslie laughed quietly. You've got to understand, Lucretia, she said, that no woman is properly dressed for dinner unless she feels comfortably nude. Don't faint. Women are not what they was, said Lucretia severely. That's the devil of it, Lucretia. They are, said Leslie. She had only half made up her mind as to the course she should pursue. Mr. Coldwell often twit her about her luck, but her luck was largely a matter of abnormal instinct, and it was in her bones that there was tragedy in the air. Suppose she saw Lady Wratham again, and this time spoke not in parables, but in plain English? It required no particular effort on Leslie's part, for her moral equipment was free from the faintest tinge of cowardice. She had inquired that morning as to whether Lady Wratham had carried her threat into execution and had written to the Chief Commissioner, but apparently her ladyship had reconsidered her decision. Had Peter Dawlish told her of the attack which had been made upon him, and which had so surprisingly led him to Mrs. Inglethorne, she would have called at Berkeley Square before then. But Peter had been silent on the subject, and Leslie did not know till the next day of that surprising outrage. She went to her bedroom and changed her dress. She was dining that night with Mr. Coldwell at the Ambassador's, which is sometimes called a nightclub by the uninitiated, but is in reality the center of London's smart life. Over her flimsy gown, which Lucretia never saw without closing her eyes in mental anguish, she put on her heavy fur coat, slipped a pair of rubbers over her shoes, and sent Lucretia down for a taxi. At 7:15, she was pressing the visitor's bell at number 377 Berkeley Square. The door was opened almost instantly by a footman. "Have you an appointment with her ladyship?" he asked, as he closed the door upon her. "No, she hasn't an appointment with her ladyship." Leslie turned in amazement at the sound of a loud, raucous voice. It was Drews, who had come into the hall from a door beneath the stairs. The white face was red and blotchy, his hair untidy. There was a stain on his white shirt front, and when he walked toward her his step was unsteady. He was, in point of fact, rather drunk, and Mr. Drews drunk was an exceedingly different person from Mr. Drews sober. The whole character of the man seemed to have changed. From being a shrinking, rather fearful servitor, he had become a blustering, loud-mouthed bully of a man. "You can get out."
Go on.
"We don't want you." He advanced toward her threateningly, but the girl did not move. The second footman had withdrawn to a respectful distance and was looking with frowning amusement at the antics of his chief. "Do you hear what I say? Clear out. We don't want any spying police girls round here." It looked as though he would use physical force to eject her, but his hand had hardly been raised when she said something in a low voice, one word. The big white hand went down, the blotchy red went out of his face, and he blinked at her like a man who was trying to swallow something that would not be swallowed. And then, looking up, she saw a resplendent figure at the head of the stairs. It was Lady Wratham. "Come up, please." The voice was hard and metallic. There was neither cordiality nor welcome in it, nor did Leslie expect any such demonstration. She mounted the stairs, but before she could reach the landing, Lady Wratham had turned and preceded her into the drawing-room. As she went in, she saw that her unwilling hostess was not alone. Before the fire stood a figure which was not wholly unfamiliar, a square, tall, Eton-cropped figure with a monocle, which fixed her with a keen and penetrating glance. The contrast between the two women was startling. Lady Wratham had never looked more lovely, more fragile, Leslie thought, than she did at that moment. She also was going out to dinner, and she wore a dress of old gold, and about her neck a magnificent chain of emeralds that terminated in a square emerald pendant which must have been worth a fortune. Anita Bellini was in scarlet, a hard, shrieking scarlet that no other woman could have worn. And yet, for some remarkable reason, it suited her. The godette was of silver lace, decorated by big green and red stones, and the thick jade bracelets and ruby necklet gave her an air of barbaric splendor. "I am sorry you came, Miss Mon. It is doubly unfortunate. If Drews had been normal, I should have sent you away without seeing you. As it is, I feel that at least an apology is due to you for the disgraceful condition of my servant." Leslie inclined her head slightly. What she had to say could not be told before this big, steely-eyed woman who stood with her back to the fire, the inevitable cigarette between her lips, the shining eyeglass fixed upon the visitor. "I wanted to see you alone if I could, Lady Wratham." Jane Wratham shook her head. "There is nothing you can tell me that I should not wish Princess Bellini to hear," she said. Without turning her head, Anita flicked her cigarette ash into the fireplace. "Perhaps Miss Mon doesn't wish to speak before a witness," she said, in her hard, deep voice. "If I were Lady Wratham, I should have reported you last night to your superiors and had you kicked out of Scotland Yard." Leslie smiled faintly. "If you were Lady Wratham, there are so many things you would do, Princess," she said, "and there would be so many things that it would be quite unnecessary for you to do." Anita's eyes did not waver. "Such as," she suggested. If she expected to frighten the younger woman, she must have been disappointed. Leslie's lips were curved in a fixed smile. "We have now come to the point," she said good-humoredly, "where I should not like to speak before witnesses, either. Though some day I may speak before more witnesses than you can crowd into a room twice the size, as many, Princess, as can squeeze themselves into court number 1 at the Old Bailey." She said this without raising her voice, and now for the first time Anita Bellini gave the slightest hint of her emotion. The eyeglass dropped and was caught deftly and replaced with too elaborate care. The strong mouth drooped a little, but recovered at once. "That sounds almost like a threat to me," she said harshly. "Young lady, I think you're going to lose a job." Quick as a flash came the answer. "Before I lose my job, Princess, you will lose a very profitable source of income." She did not wait for the answer, but turned to Lady Wratham. "Will you see me alone, Lady Wratham?" Jane Wratham's voice shook a little. She was a very bewildered woman. "I brought you here to apologize to you for Drews," she said breathlessly, "and you have made use of the opportunity to insult my friend, a lady who—" Her voice grew husky, and she stopped as though she could not articulate further. There was nothing more to be gained here, unless she was prepared to blurt her questions before the very woman who she was anxious should remain in ignorance of the information which had come to her. Leslie had unfastened her coat and coming upstairs. Behind her brown fur Lady Wratham saw the silk-clad figure in mauve. Princess Anita Bellini smiled. She had a flair for Paris models. "They pay you well in the police, my young friend," she said bluntly. "Who is the lucky gentleman who pays for your clothes?" "My lawyer until I am 25, said Leslie. "Fortunate lawyer. Who is he?" Leslie smiled. "You ought to know him. He acted for you in your bankruptcy." And with that parting shot, she went out of the room, knowing she was a cat, but realizing that a cat was entitled to what pleasure she might find in getting under the skin of a tigress. Half an hour later, Mr. Coldwell unfolded his serviette and shook his head soberly. "You're a cat too, but you're a clever little cat. And when, Tabitha, did you discover that Her Highness was a bankrupt? I confess that is news to me." The girl laughed ruefully. "I read gazettes," she said. "It is depraved in me, but I find them more interesting than the best sex novel that any schoolgirl has ever written." The bankruptcy was arranged 10 years ago in the quietest way. The princess took up her residence in a small country town before she filed her petition, and it is easy to keep these country proceedings out of the London papers. On this occasion, she described herself as Mrs. Bellini. There is no law compelling you to use a foreign title.
Pussycat, pussycat, murmură mărecoldul.
And did she annihilate you? She was slightly withering, said Leslie carelessly. But Drew's dropped. I'm awfully worried about that. I don't see why you should be, said Coldwell, and beckoned a waiter. When the man had taken the order. Do you know, you're almost persuading me that there is something big behind this dollish mystery? I don't mean the discovery, which is very unlikely to be made, that Drews was the forger after all. A tall woman had come into the restaurant and was glaring round through the thick lenses of her horn-rimmed spectacles. She was very straight and spare, her head covered with a mop of white hair, which lent her an almost comical air of ferocity. She nodded curtly to the inspector and went to meet the gesticulating maitre d'hotel. That is Mama, said Coldwell.
Mamma?
Who's Mama? Your interesting convicts. Margaret Dawlish? Leslie opened her eyes in astonishment. This is the last place I should have expected to see her. She dines here every night, said Coldwell. I have a good idea why. Leslie looked at Peter's mother again. The square jaw, the thin lips, the deep eyes, all fulfilled the mental picture she had made of her. If you weren't here, do you know what I should do? She asked at last. Whatever it is, don't, said Coldwell apprehensively. His relationship with Leslie was a curious one. In the old days of Commissioner Mon, he had been the colonel's chief assistant. Though he was only a sergeant in those days, he was admitted very largely to the confidence of that genius of Scotland Yard, spent long weekends at Sutton Colley, and had assumed a sort of guardianship toward Colonel Mon's motherless child. There never was a time within Leslie's recollection that Josiah Coldwell had not figured largely in her life. He was one of her father's executors, the best trusted of all his friends, and it was only natural, when she conceived the idea of adopting police work as a profession, that he should be her sponsor. It was not until a very long time after she had put the suggestion to him that he agreed. At first he had pooh-poohed, then he had grown solemn, and then mournful. But in the end, she had had her way. If you don't put me there, Uncle Josiah, I shall go into training as a private detective. It only needed this threat to force his capitulation, for private detectives were contemptible figures in the eyes of this regular policeman. For him, it was a matter of pride that she had succeeded. Today, if the truth be told, if she had expressed the slightest hint of weariness and a desire to return to the obscurity of what is termed civilian life, he would have been thrust in the deeps of gloom. He did not tell her this in the course of the dinner. She had guessed it easily enough long before, but he did venture to return to a matter which rather worried him. As the band struck up a dance tune and she rose invitingly, he groaned and came to his feet. I'll be awfully glad, Leslie, when you find a young man to dance these infernal jazzes with you. How can you expect the high-class crooks of London to have any respect for a man who dances in public? He was over 60, yet, in truth, no better dancer took the floor that night. But it pleased him to talk of his decrepitude. I'm not made right, said Leslie, as he guided her through the dancers who crowded the floor. Young men have no appeal for me whatever. Mr. Coldwell peered down at her. Are you going to be one of those love is not for me girls? He asked gloomily. Somehow I can't imagine you running a garage of toy palms. Leslie's eyes roved around the room, and presently they rested upon Margaret Dawlish, hard-faced, inflexible, the type of Roman mother who could never forgive the humiliation that Peter had brought upon her. How queer was the average man's conception of the average woman. The conventional mother, soft, yielding, ready to endure all and forgive all for the sake of her children, was no figment of imagination, but the throwouts were innumerable. Leslie started to count all the instances she knew and grew tired of the exercise. She had witnessed, incredible though it might seem, a mother dancing on this very floor while her child was dying in a nursing home a few streets away. She knew mothers who could not speak of their daughters without growing incoherent with rage. And this was the fourth instance of a mother who could sweep her only son out of memory, out of existence, for some offense he had committed, not against her, but against society. Margaret Dawlish sat alone at a little table, very upright, very forbidding, and when the maitre d'hotel, in the manner of his kind, approached her with a smile, she dismissed him with a few words and, raising her lorgnette, made an inspection of the dancers. "That woman is granite," said Leslie, as the band stopped and they walked back to their table.
Which?
"You mean Mrs. Dawlish?"
Yes.
"I rather think she is on the hard side. That sort of thing meant a lot to her. She hates this company and this place, but for 5 years, ever since her son was sent to prison, she has made a point of dining here." Leslie nodded. A gesture of defiance.
Gosh.
These respectable people. They dare not leave a room for fear somebody talks behind their backs. It was toward 11 o'clock, and Coldwell had summoned the waiter to pay his bill, when a footman came from the vestibule and, bending over, whispered something to him. "A phone message. I expect it's from the Embankment," he said. "Excuse me, Leslie." He threaded a way through the dancers on the floor and was gone 10 minutes. When he came back, she saw his white eyebrows were met in a frown. "The Kingston police think they've got a line to those infernal motor-car bandits," he said. He referred to a gang which was occupying the public attention at that time, 3 men who, in hired or stolen motor cars, had been traveling through Surrey, holding up isolated residences at the point of a pistol and getting away with as much portable property as they could lay their hands upon. "I'll see you home," he said as he paid the bill, "and then I'll toddle down to Kingston. I wish to heaven the Kingston police would make their discoveries at a reasonable hour." "I'll go with you," she said. "I'm not a bit sleepy, and it's a braw-bricked moonlicht nicht." He looked at her dubiously. "I don't know that you're dressed for a motor car journey, but if you wish you can come along. I have phoned for the police car. It will be here in a few minutes." She went out into the lobby to put on the woolen spencer she had brought in preparation for a cold journey home, and over that her coat. It was true that she never felt less like sleep. In a sense, she was at a loose end, and the prospect of doing a little work before she went to bed was a pleasing one, though in all probability she would play no other part than that of spectator and audience. The trip promised to be the more interesting because she had, that day, been tracing the previous convictions of 3 men who were suspected of being the motor bandits, and very commonplace individuals they were. That had been the most shocking discovery she made when she came to Scotland Yard, the commonplaceness, indeed the insignificance, of what it described as the criminal class. Out-of-work plumbers, laborers, carters, and clerks, with a painter here and there, formed the bulk of them. The women only had an individuality. There was no habitual woman criminal quite untouched by romance. Their stories were altogether different, their lives more varied, and, if the truth be told, their enterprise and inventive qualities more fascinating. She passed through the swing doors into the street. The night was bitterly cold, and the sky overhead was clear. The bright moon which she had recklessly inferred was not in evidence, but there were all the other attractive conditions for a midnight ride. The car was an open tourer with a plenitude of rugs, and as Mr. Coldwell fixed the rear screen to shield her face from the cutting air, the journey promised no discomforts. The car passed swiftly through Kensington and across Hammersmith Bridge, and in an incredibly short space of time was running down Kingston Vale. The driver pulled up at the police station behind a big touring car which was unattended, and they got down. In the charge room they found the inspector talking to a middle-aged man who was apparently the owner of the car. "Sorry to bring you down, Mr. Coldwell," said the inspector, "but this sounds almost like one of the motor crowd's little jokes." The car owner, apparently, was the proprietor of a small garage. That afternoon he had been approached by a seemingly decent man, who asked him if he would come to London with the idea of negotiating for an important journey. The garage keeper, as it happened, had some business in town and had met the hirer at a little restaurant in the Brompton Road. He seemed all right to me. The garage keeper continued his narrative. It was only after I got home that I began to smell a rat. He wanted me to pick him up at the end of Barnes Common, near the Wimbledon Road, at 10:15 tonight, and drive him to Southampton. He asked for a closed car, but I told him I hadn't got one that could do the journey, and I didn't like the idea anyway. But as he offered me double the fare I should have asked, and paid half of it down, I agreed. Did you ask him why he wanted to go to Southampton at 10:15? That was the first question I asked, said the man. He told me he was dining with some friends, and that would mean he would lose the boat train. The Berengaria pulls out at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning, and all the passengers must be on the ship overnight. I've had that job before, so it wasn't unusual. The only queer thing about it was that instead of asking me to pick him up at a house, he fixed this place on Barnes Common. But he told me he didn't want his friends to know that he was leaving the next day. At any rate, I fell for him, but as time went on I began to get suspicious and communicated with the police. What sort of looking man was he? Asked Leslie. A middle-aged man, miss, said the chauffeur owner, a little surprised at a question from this quarter. It struck me that he'd been drinking a little, but that's neither here nor there. He was well dressed, and that's all I can tell you about him except that he was clean-shaven, had rather a big face, and wore a soft felt hat. Coldwell turned to the girl. Does that describe any of the people we have been looking over? He asked. She shook her head. No, she said quietly, but it rather accurately describes Drews. Drews, he said incredulously. You're not suggesting that Drews is one of the gang? I'm not suggesting anything, she said, biting her lip thoughtfully. Did you notice his hands, mister? Porter, said the chauffeur. Yes, miss. I did notice his hands when he took off his gloves to pay me. They were very white. She looked at Coldwell. That is an even more accurate description, she said. You didn't go to the Common, did you? Asked Coldwell.
No, sir.
The inspector went up in my car with a couple of policemen. He must have smelled a rat, said the local inspector. There was no sign of anybody at 10:15, and apparently he was very particular about his being there absolutely on time. He told Mr. Porter, if I'm not there by 25 minutes past, don't wait for me. That sounds rather like the gang, Mr. Coldwell, he added. It is an old trick of theirs to hire a car and arrange to be picked up in some quiet spot. The telephone bell tinkled in another room, and he went to the instrument. He was gone 5 minutes. When he came back, the gang busted a house the other side of Guildford at 9 o'clock, he said. The car smashed into a ditch, and 2 of them have been caught by the Surrey police. Coldwell pursed his lips. That disposes of your theory, he said. Driving back up Kingston Vale, Coldwell expatiated upon his favorite theme, which might be headed, No effort is wasted when you're dealing with lawbreakers. A lot of men would grouse about being brought out in the middle of the night on a fool's errand, but it isn't possible to investigate the reason why a condensed milk tin has been found in an ash pit without learning something valuable. And if that hirer was friend Drews. As it was, said Leslie promptly. Well, we've learned something, continued Coldwell. It brings him into a new list, so to speak. He's in the people who do strange things class, and that makes him stand out from the mass of law-abiding citizens. They passed swiftly down Roehampton Lane, climbed the little slope that carried them over the railway bridge, and had reached the middle of the common when Chief Inspector Coldwell began to enlarge and illustrate his theory. Just ahead of them, Leslie saw the rear lights of a car moving out from the side of the road. Never despise little cases, he began, because... There was a grinding of brakes. The car stopped so violently that Leslie's nose touched the glass screen painfully. What's wrong? Asked Coldwell sharply. He, too, had seen the car ahead, and his first thought was that his driver was avoiding a collision. The police chauffeur was looking round. I'm sorry, sir. I was rather startled. Did you see a man lying on the sidewalk? No, where? Asked the interested Coldwell. The driver reversed, and the car moved slowly backward. They saw a black something in the darkness, and then, as the machine moved back a few more feet, The headlamps showed the figure of a man. Coldwell got down from the car slowly. "It looks like a drunk," he mumbled. "You'd better stay where you are, Leslie." But his foot had hardly touched the ground before she had followed. Well enough, Inspector Coldwell knew that this was no drunk. The attitude, the outstretched arms, the legs slightly doubled, told him, before he saw the little pool of crimson on the sidewalk, that there was no life here. For a second the two stood gazing down at the pitiable figure. "Drews," said the girl quietly. "Somehow I expected it."
It was Drews, and he was dead.
The heavy overcoat was buttoned across his chest. There was no sign of a hat, and his hands, unloved, were tightly
clenched.
As she looked, Leslie saw a queer green glitter in the light of the motor lamps. "He has something in his left hand," she said in a hushed voice, and kneeling down, Inspector Coldwell pried loose the fingers, and the thing that the dead man held fell with a tinkle to the graveled path. Coldwell picked it up and examined it curiously. It was a large, square emerald in a platinum setting, one edge of which was broken, as though it had been torn forcibly from a large ornament.
"That is queer," he said.
She took the emerald from his hand and carried it nearer to the lamp. Now she knew that she had made no mistake. It was the pendant on the chain she had seen that evening glittering on Lady Ratham's neck. Chapter 6. The effect on Lady Ratham. In a few words she told her companion. For his part, he was too worried about her presence to comprehend fully. "You had better get into the car, Leslie. Driver, take Miss Mon." "I'll stay here," said Leslie in a low voice. "I'm not very shocked. And please don't touch that overcoat." He was stooping to unfasten the button when she spoke. "Not till you let me see it." Mr. Coldwell hesitated a moment and then stepped aside, and the girl bent over the figure, keeping her eyes averted from that white face. "I thought so," she said. "The second button has been fastened to the third buttonhole. Whoever killed him put on his overcoat and buttoned it. Now you can unfasten it." Mr. Coldwell sent the chauffeur for assistance and resumed his examination of the body. The man had been shot at close range through the heart. The waistcoat had been burned by the explosion. There were no other injuries that he could see. One side of the figure was yellow with dust, as though it had been dragged some distance along the ground. "I wish you wouldn't." Coldwell looked round in helpless distress. He had taken an electric flashlight from the car before he sent it away, and this he had placed on the path so that the rays spread fan-shape over the body. "Couldn't you wait at a little distance?" "Please don't worry about me, Mr. Coldwell," said Leslie. There was no tremor in her voice, he noted with satisfaction. "I am not going to faint. You seem to forget that the majority of nurses are women, and death isn't so horrible to me as some expressions of life. Can I help you at all? I've got a tiny little pencil lamp in my bag." He scratched his chin. "I don't know," he said dubiously. "You might look in the road and see if you can find any marks of a body being dragged, and then search around a bit." She got out the lamp, which, in spite of its smallness, gave a very bright light, and carried out his instructions methodically. She had not to look far before she found the traces she sought, a serpentine smear that reached from the center of the road to the sidewalk. There were stains, little red smudges that were still wet when she put her finger to them. The conditions were favorable to an undisturbed search, for Barnes Common was unusually free from traffic. One motor bus lumbered past, a homeward-bound limousine from town was succeeded by another, and if the chauffeurs were interested in the spectacle of a man kneeling by what looked like a heap of rags on the sidewalk, the occupants of the cars did not apparently share their curiosity. She paced the trail, judged it to be between 12 and 13 feet from the place where the body was found. On the other side of the footpath was rough, common land, grass and bushes in irregular patches. She began to search the ground, and here she had an unusual reward, for, passing round a thick, low bush, she saw, lying together on the grass, a number of objects. The first was a flat pocketbook that had been opened and its contents pulled out, for round about was a litter of papers, which she collected quickly. Fortunately, it was a still night, and there was no wind to carry them away. The second package was a brown envelope, and she made a brief examination. There was a steamship ticket issued to Anthony Drews, first-class saloon, Southampton to New York. In this envelope was a new passport. The third object was also a pocketbook, brand new. The perfume of the Russian leather cover told her that. This also had been opened in such a hurry that the strap about it had been broken. It was stuffed tight with $1,000 notes. She collected the 3 packages and sought for more, but there was none. And then she took stock of the place where she had found them. It was immediately behind a big bush which effectively screened all view of the road. She put her lamp close to the ground and moved it slowly. Here was a curiously mottled patch of grass. In some places it was gray with frost, in others wet and crushed. The ground was too hard for footprints, but without their aid, she could reconstruct all that had happened here less than an hour ago. Somebody had come behind this brush to examine the contents of the pockets. The papers had been taken out one by one, examined and thrown away, and the object had not been robbery. The tightly filled pocketbook proved that. It could not have been a chance thief who came upon the body. No honest person would have made this search. It had been somebody looking for a definite thing. She went back to Coldwell with her discoveries, just as the police car came flying over the railway bridge, followed by a motor ambulance. She told Coldwell hurriedly what she had found, and he was not surprised. "I've been searching his pockets. Most of them are inside out," he said. And then, abruptly, "Where is Peter Dawlish?" She stared at him, open-mouthed. "Peter Dawlish? What has he got to do?" And then she remembered Peter's threat and saw that it was inevitable that suspicion should attach to him. "He hadn't a pistol yesterday," she said, "and I doubt whether he's got one now. If Drews had been shot dead in the street, I should think he'd be under suspicion, but Peter Dawlish would hardly shoot a man, put him in a car, and drive him to Barnes." The old man nodded. "I agree with you, Leslie, but we shall have to pull him in and make inquiries. Drews has been shot 3 times. That's rather a queer thing, and he has been shot through the heart. We shan't know exactly until the pathologist has seen him, but I think I am right. And listen, did you see the footprints?" He pointed to the smooth granite curb, and she saw for the first time the indubitable impressions of a bare foot. The ball of the foot and toe prints were unmistakable. He put the 3 packages Leslie had found in his overcoat pocket. "Go along and see Lady Wratham and tell her what has happened. Take this with you, and for the love of Mike, don't lose it." He put the square emerald in her hand, and she dropped it into her bag. "If it's the pendant, as you say, find out what has happened to the rest of the necklace." He bundled her into the police car, and she was glad to escape, because by now the large force of police on the spot had been augmented by that curious crowd which sooner or later gathers from nowhere on the scene of any tragedy. The windows were in darkness when she drove up to the house in Berkeley Square, and instead of ringing, she wielded the heavy knocker. She had to wait a little time, and then it was a footman who opened the door, and his manner and mien were both respectful and a little nervous. "Do you want to see her ladyship, miss?" he said. "She's upstairs with Mrs. Gurdon. There is Mrs. Gurdon now." Greta was coming down the stairs. She was in that peculiar style of evening dress which she affected. Greta made most of her own clothes from the latest Paris models, and usually in the most unsuitable material. Their homemadeness was never blatant. They did not proclaim, but hinted it. Leslie looked up at the rouged face and the black, staring eyes, and it required no particular acumen on her part to detect Greta Gurdon's agitation. "Oh, my dear miss, whatever your name is," she said, "do come up and see Lady Wratham. You are Miss what is your name? Mon, isn't it? I'm so glad. Drews has been a perfect beast." She held out her hand dramatically. It was shaking. "You don't know how glad I am to see you." Her eyelids were blinking up and down with a rapidity that fascinated and would have amused Leslie in any other circumstances. What has Drews been doing? She asked. Won't you come up and see Lady Wratham? Begged Greta. She'll tell you so much better than I. My dear Jane can put everything into the most understandable terms. Drews has been simply awful, made a terrible scene, and walked out quite suddenly. It's dreadful what servants are coming to, isn't it? I think it must be the war or... A cool voice from the darkness above interrupted her flow of disjointed explanation. Ask Miss Maud to come up. I want to see her alone. Leslie went up the stairs, and as she reached the first turn, she saw that the drawing-room door was open. There was no light on the stairs, save for that which came from the open door. In one corner of the spacious landing, she saw a small wheeled table. She walked in, closing the door behind her. Lady Wratham was standing behind a little table near the fireplace. She wore a dark day dress without ornamentation, and Leslie's quick woman's eyes saw that she had changed. Her stockings, the very fine-textured, flesh-colored hosiery she had seen on her earlier that evening, had been replaced by a slightly darker pair. But only for a second did the details of the dress interest her. What a change had come to Jane Wratham's face. She was made up, that was clear. The delicate flush of her cheeks was neither natural nor normal in her. She had helped her lips toward a verisimilitude to a healthy red. Her eyes, however, defied all artificial aid. They seemed to have sunk into her head. Great dark circles, which even careful powdering could not disguise, surrounded them. Have you brought me any news? She drawled out. It was not like Lady Wratham to drawl. I telephoned to you about an hour ago, but unfortunately I could not catch you. On the whole, I think I prefer that a woman officer should deal with this case. Has he stolen anything? Asked Leslie bluntly, and to her amazement Lady Wratham shook her head. No, I've missed nothing. I shouldn't imagine he would steal. He may have, of course, but I shall be able to tell you more about that tomorrow. He was grossly insulting and left me at a second's notice. Have you been out? Yes, I went to a dinner with Princess Anita Bellini. We intended going on to the theater, but I had a headache and decided to return. What time did you come back? Asked Leslie. Lady Wratham raised her eyes to the ceiling. It may have been 9:30, probably a little earlier, she said. We dined at a little restaurant which the princess knows. And then you came back and had another dinner, said Leslie steadily. The table is still on the landing, set for two, so far as I could see. For a second the woman was staggered out of self-control. Her hand went up to her lips. Oh, that, she said awkwardly. My friend Mrs. Gurdon came later, and we gave her some supper. Leslie shook her head. I wish you would be frank with me, Lady Wratham, she said. The truth is, you didn't go out to dinner at all, did you? For a second the woman made no reply. I don't know what I did, she said. Between despair and suppressed anger her voice was a wail. He drove everything out of my mind. Oh, if I had known! If I had known! She covered her eyes with her hands, and Leslie heard the sobs she could not stifle. What did he say to you before he went? She asked inexorably. Lady Wratham shook her head. I can't tell you. He was dreadful, dreadful. Leslie had waited this opportunity to fire her shot. He is in our hands, she said. Shall we bring him here? The woman uncovered her eyes and stepped back with a little scream. Here? Here, she said huskily. My heavens, not here. He must go to the mort. She stopped herself, but too late. How did you know he was dead? Asked Leslie sternly. Under the rouge the woman's face was gray.